What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel and to the highly requested to come back Overwatch League off-season news cap. And this time, of course, we are going over everything that happens during the Season 4 off-season. So many of you have been waiting for this to return, and I'm happy to deliver because it's easier for both of us. I know a lot of you guys have said that you enjoy having a weekly roundup rather than having videos for every single little thing that happens, and that's a lot easier on me because I simply can't do that. I don't have enough time, so it's great for both of us. I make these large weekly news roundups for two reasons. For one, it's good content during the off season since we don't have any games to talk about, but two, a lot of you depend on me. I've learned this over the last year or so for Overwatch League news, maybe because you don't pay attention to Twitter or social media all that much, or maybe you just don't use them in general, so you completely depend on my videos and other people's videos. So I'm glad to be able to help you in any way I can, of course. One other thing to keep in mind before getting started is that I may end up missing some things here and there just because there is a lot going on all at once, especially during these first few weeks when things are very, very busy. So if I do end up missing something, then let me know down in the comment section. But also, try and remember as well that things could end up happening directly after I make this video live on YouTube. Like, I could just upload it and then new news will drop immediately after. So keep in mind the time that I end up making this video go live because something else could drop after. And of course, I'll be trying my best to leave pinned comments down below if and when these situations play out. Anyway, let's dive straight into this because a lot has already happened in this first week. I mean, it's been crazy. As I like to call it, the Great Purge has already started. This first week has been absolutely brutal. Teams are clearing house left and right. If we're talking about cleaning house, then I think the London Spitfire are a great place to start. So far, they have parted ways with Hailey, Krillin, Clestine, Although, Babel, Jihoon, Shui, and most recently J-Mac. London's roster now only consists of 4 players. There's Fuse, Sanguinar, Bernard, and Glister, and I'm expecting all of these guys to be gone as well because all of the recent rumors have indicated that London is looking to get rid of their full Korean roster completely and go more towards a local/Western roster. I don't know about Fuse because, like, he didn't really play all that much this year. It's been a while since he's played a lot in general, but as for Glister, Bernard, and of course Sanguinar, those guys are of value, so that's probably why they're still on the roster. They're most likely going to get traded somewhere in the near future, so London can make a quick buck or two. In turn, this money's going to allow them to spend more on big name free agents out there, whether they would be rookies or experienced veterans, maybe like Shaz, let's say. Again, I don't know what's going to happen with Fuse, but I know for a fact that Sanguinar, Bernard, and Glister are going to draw interest from multiple teams because these guys are potential team-changing players. They have very high ceilings. They showed off a lot of skills as rookie players. To further indicate they want massive change, they also parted ways with their entire coaching staff, signaling that they don't really care about how good they were with the scouting or anything and how they were able to persevere at certain points throughout the season. They're done with that. They just want to move on. To add icing onto the cake, they also signed a new GM who goes by the name of Noki. Or is it Nuki? I don't know. Sorry, don't really know how to pronounce it. But if you're not familiar with this guy, he is a German manager. He used to be the manager for 2 of the most recent Germany World Cup teams, but also he was a manager for the London Spitfires Academy team, aka British Hurricane. Could that be a sign that London's looking to bring British Hurricane players onto their roster? I wouldn't be surprised. I don't have a lot of time on my hands to watch them, but I keep up with the news, so I'm well aware that British Hurricane has been the most dominant team in European contenders for quite a long time, so it would make a lot of sense to bring in some of those guys and see what they're made of at the Overwatch League level. Seeing where everybody goes and what London plans to do is going to be very interesting. I'm very excited to see what happens next. The next big team to completely just clean house is of course the Dallas Fuel, who did not renew the contracts of Closer, Onigod, Note, Crimzo, Paintbrush, AKM, Gamsu, Trill, and Unko. And that of course means the lone survivor of the Dallas Fuel Season 3 roster is Doha, who they did officially announce has renewed his contract for next year. Now in terms of like face value / shock value, it's pretty crazy and overwhelming to see everybody leave all at once, but it kind of makes sense in a way because a bunch of those guys were kind of dead weight to begin with. Think about the likes of Unko, AKM, and even Trill. Those guys were already halfway out the door to begin with because they were ready to pursue a career in Valorant. They were already done with Overwatch during the season. All of those guys are officially LFT in Valorant for the time being. But surprisingly, adding on to this retirement list is none other than Gamsu. Now this is someone I was not expecting to go. He's been a mainstay in the league for 3 years now, and I just can't believe he's going. If you did not know, he is done with Overwatch and he wants to re-pursue his career in League of Legends like he did before he came into Overwatch. I know Gamsu is going to find success in whatever he does because he's just such an amazing guy. He can't do any wrong. He's such a positive figure. I love that guy so much, but but man, it's really sad to see him go. Despite the fact that he really wasn't that good on Dallas this year to begin with, I just can't stand the fact that he's leaving. He was one of my all-time favorite players to ever touch the Overwatch League stage. I wish Gamsu nothing but the best of luck in his future, and I hope he dominates in League of Legends because he deserves it more than just about anybody else out there. He was one of the most positive forces in Overwatch League history, and I'm going to miss him so much. As for all of the other guys who got released, none of their departures really surprised me all that much, I would say, but at the same time, it is a little sad to see the likes of Onigod, Note, and Crimson all get released just because they all had pretty decent seasons. None of them are terrible players. Onigod really didn't get to show off that much this year. He's kind of put into crazy circumstances because of the decay situation, but I think under the right circumstances and coaching, he could end up becoming a really good hit scan player. He just needs the right environment. As for Note, he surprised me this year. I had my doubts about him heading into Season 3. I thought he lacked flexibility off of D.Va and that he just wasn't as good as he used to be, but on D.Va and Sigma, he played very well this year. He was a solid off-tank player, so it's a little weird to see them get rid of him like this. As for Crimson, he's replaceable, but statistically he was pretty good. I'll give you that. I think at the very least, Note and Crimson will likely find new homes. Maybe the Vancouver Titans will sign them just so they can have a more Canadian team, I guess you could say. The future of Onigod and Paintbrush is a bit more up in the air, but you never know what could happen because if they end up proving themselves, then anything's possible. The only other bit of Dallas Fuel news I have for you is that their former assistant coach Vol'jin was released. This actually happened a while back, but I figured that I would bring it up anyway in case you did not already hear the news because he's been on the team for a good amount of time now, and this does lower their coaching count a little bit, so this kind of further proves that Dallas is just trying to rebuild, and that's something I am very happy about. If you're a Dallas fan, I know this can be very sad to just say goodbye to so many familiar faces, but this is something they should have done a while ago, and I hope some of you realize that. This is a team that always just wanted to hold on to the past, but it's clear that that just isn't something they can do. They need to start over fresh and build a good team, and they're going to do it around Doha, clearly, and their head coach, Young. This is their chance to start fresh and maybe even go full Korean. I think that might not be a bad idea considering the fact that Dallas is a rich team. They usually have a lot of money to spend, so I expect that they'd be able to build a pretty decent team. If you're a Dallas fan, this is a sad time, but also a time to be excited because your team could be built the best they ever have been. We're all going to be keeping a very close eye on the Dallas Fuel moving forward because they're going to have one of the craziest off seasons out of any team. Next up, we don't have to go very far as we're talking about the Houston Outlaws now, and they did not renew the contracts of Muma, Blase, Linkser, and Jexe, and the big shocker there for me is Jexe not coming back. I understand that he was probably only on a one-year contract to begin with because he came over from the Seoul Dynasty, but Jexe had a pretty good year. He started off hot, and I think that he cooled down after a while, but he was never what you'd call a bad player or average player. He was always slightly above average, in my opinion. He was good. As for Muma, Blase, and Linkser, I don't really know what their future is going to hold. None of them had spectacular seasons. Muma in particular had his worst year as a pro, and it wasn't even close. He was a bottom-tier main tank. He literally got replaced by Hydration mid-season. Blase's okay. I think he could find a new home. He's a decent flex DPS with certain strengths, and Linkser is kind of weird to me because I thought he had a decent season, at least compared to season 2, but he's very streaky. I think we all know that by now. He's a very hot and cold player. Like when he's on, he dominates, but when he's cold, he's just a burden to his team. It's pretty apparent what Linkser's ceiling is at this point in his career, so you know what you're going to get with him, but I just think that it might not be worth the risk considering there's other hit scan prospects out there who have higher ceilings overall. They're younger, they're hungrier, they're better overall, so why get Linkser when you can go for that, you know? Plus, he has had these confidence issues in the past, like during the early stages of Season 3, for example. He wasn't feeling like himself for whatever reason, he wasn't really performing, and I don't know if any team is going to want to take a risk on that, you know? Don't get me wrong, I love Linkser as a player and as a person, but I just don't know if he's going to be able to find a new team. I want him to succeed and find a new home, but I'm not sure what his future is going to hold. As for another player we have to talk about in regards to the Outlaws, there's Dante, whose contract also expired, but don't give up hope just yet, Outlaws fans. There is a chance he could re-sign with the team still. He is not decided yet. But of course, with him being a free agent, this means that he has all of the room in the world to explore all of his options. And if I'm Dante, I'm seriously thinking about if the Outlaws could bring a winning culture. He's been there for 2 years now. It still hasn't come up. And that might mean that it's time for a bit of a scenery change where he can actually go and win somewhere because he deserves it. Dante is a phenomenal talent. He's one of the best Western DPS out there. Given that they failed to give him a really good team for 2 years now, the Outlaws are going to need to come up with one heck of a pitch to keep him stay, I think. How the Outlaws Outlaws proceed this offseason could entirely depend on what Dante decides to do. So that's a storyline to pay attention to. There's also a little bit of other coaching news with the Outlaws. For one, the big thing is that Junk Buck, formerly of the San Francisco Shock, has signed as co-head coach along with Harsha. And this is pretty big because Junk Buck is a really great coach. He was so good at his job for the Shock over the last couple of years. And Harsha was also on the Shock back in the day. So these guys get to be the Shock disciples, if you will, together and try and make a new super team. It is my hope that having another head coach along with Harsha will put this team in a better direction coaching-wise, because they did seem a little bit lost at times and their execution was sloppy to say the least in a lot of different metas out there. So I'm hoping that Junk Buck can help solve this. I don't know if it was entirely because of Harsha, but you have to assume that he was part of the issue. So maybe having another brain in there can help him think of some better solutions moving forward. The other bit of coaching news I have for you is that assistant coaches Hureg and Dream are both off the team. Sadly, the good luck charm of the pro Overwatch scene is no longer in the Overwatch League yet again, and I don't know if he's going to come back this time. He really didn't do that good of a job in his first year as a coach, but maybe someone else will give him a shot. I don't know what's going to happen with Dream either, but hopefully those two both find a new home somewhere. And this goes to show you that the Outlaws are totally committed to rebuilding this coaching staff from the ground up. Now it's Guangzhou Charge time, and they have released 4 players so far, that being Chara, Neptuno, Crystal, and WYA, and the second two, not too surprising I would say, they were both two-way players. Crystal's a little weird though, just because they signed him during the summer, it hasn't even been that long, but maybe he just didn't work out in the way they hoped he would, or perhaps they didn't like the controversy surrounding the pickup to begin with, because a lot of people were not happy about that because of Crystal's past. In WYA, it's not a big deal, I mean, literally, it's Shu, why would you ever want to replace him? He's a beast. Chara and Neptuno, though, are a bit stranger. Neptuno in particular, I feel really bad for because of the whole visa thing that was going on. He had major issues that made him travel around the world all the time. He kept going back and forth between Korea and Spain all the time, and when they needed him the most in a Mercy meta, he was not there for them because of quarantine. Neptuno got screwed over by the coronavirus pandemic and visa issues. I mean, he lost out on so much potential playtime. At the start of this year, before he had to go leave and renew his visa, he was the starter of the team. He won the starting job battle over Chara, but then when he has to leave, Chara takes over and he really takes advantage of it and he pops off big time, and then Neptuno isn't even needed anymore at that point because Chara's playing so well that they do not want to mess with it. I really do feel bad for Neptuno, and I hope that he does find a new home in the future for Season 4. As for Chara, we were just talking about him. I'm very surprised to see the Charge get rid of him considering he was their team captain in the past, and the fact that he had a really good season. I mean, besides his Mercy, which was kind of bad, I won't lie, his Lucio and Brigitte were both pretty darn good. He held his own against a lot of other solid main supports. Considering the fact that they got rid of 3 other players, including their other main support, that tells me the Charge are trying to go all in with a blockbuster move of sorts to get a big-time main support player on their roster. Probably one that's a bit more balanced, because Neptuno and Chara, while they were both decent at times, they both have their weaknesses. They're probably trying to get the best of both worlds. They want a super balanced main support that can play it all, and I don't know if that's going to be through a trade or through a big-time signing, but I'm expecting a huge pickup at the main support position. Otherwise, I don't know what's going on over in Guangzhou land. The other bit of news about the Charge that I guess we could talk about is the fact that 3 of their coaches from the 2020 season are now gone, including their head coach. I talked about it in detail in my Gladiators news video from last week, so if you want to know all of my opinions on it, then make sure to check out this video after you're done watching this one. But I think this is a good move because the Charge coaches did make some questionable decisions, and I'm very interested to see what they do with their coaches now. I think they could definitely make some big-time upgrades. Moving on to the Florida Mayhem, they've decided to part ways with 4 players, and the first one I wanted to cover is the fact that Saya player is now off the team, and he's done with Pro Overwatch for that matter, as he has decided to pursue a career in Valorant, and this is just very sad news because he's probably the first thing that comes to mind when I think of the Florida Mayhem, especially during the first few years, because he was one of the only bright spots. He was their first ever superstar before guys like Yaki and BQB really started to surface. He was their guy, and he always has been, in my opinion. Of course, it's an argument at the end of the day, but I think that he might actually be the best Widowmaker to ever touch the Overwatch League stage. At least the best duelist at the end of the day, if not one of the best. He was that good at his job, and it sucks that he wasn't able to be part of a winning culture, you know? He left so early on during the Mayhem season this year, so he wasn't really around when they were winning a lot of games. It sucks. he was just losing all the time when he actually played, and I really wish that we got to see him win some games because I think that would have made him and a lot of other people very happy. I will say though, I totally respect and understand his decision to move on from Overwatch and play Valorant because this game is definitely more up his alley. It's more about the mechanics and shooting stuff, which is what he's so great at. So I'm expecting great things from him in this game, and I can't wait to see what he does. The other three people that ended up leaving the team are Chris, Byram, and Karayan. And I think Byram and Karayan leaving the team aren't too shocking, I would say, for the most part, because they were kind of bench players. Byram only played when double flex support was a thing, and Karayan only played during the Reinhardt meta, and then after that, Fate kind of took over, and we never saw from him again, really. Overall, Byram and Karayan were both expendable pieces, and it's worth getting rid of them if that means you can spend money on a better player moving forward. But Chris leaving is a bit more shocking to me because he really didn't play that bad this year. Compared to Season 2 at least, he really did step up his game, especially on the Baptiste and the Brigitte. He was by no means a top-tier main support player or anything, but he got the job done, and in my opinion, the only part of his game that seriously needed work was his Lucio. Everything else was pretty okay for the most part. There's also the fact that there were so many words of praise from the Mayhem talking about how great of a leader he is and how great of a communicator he is in-game, but I guess that's not valuable enough for them anymore. And I guess I can kind of understand that because while Chris did have a decent season, he certainly is replaceable. Given that Chris was the only main support player on the roster, I'm expecting Florida to go out and also try and pursue a big-time main support just like the Charge. Maybe they're going to get into some bidding wars. Given that Florida only have 2 DPS players officially now, I think it is safe to assume they're definitely going to pursue a big-time name at that position too to kind of just round out their DPS rotation and have someone who can fill in the holes left behind by BQB and Yaki. This offseason is going to be very big for the Mayhem because it could be the difference between them taking that next level and being stuck as like an A-tier team that isn't quite good enough to make it to that championship level. Now let's talk Chengdu Hunters, who made 2 releases only, and those being A-Ting and Bacon Jack, and both of them are pretty insignificant, I would say, as neither of them really got all that much playtime this season. They were kind of in at some points, like Bacon Jack was basically just like a Junkertown specialist for Widowmaker stuff, and then A-Ting came in for Winston every once in a while, and as an experimental change to see if he could be any better than Among, which he failed miserably at most of the time. They were occupying roster spots that could go towards some much more talented Chinese players out there, especially if you look at some of the Chinese contenders players from Team CC, let's say, for example. There are some really solid players out there that Chengdu could end up picking up. In terms of other departure news, co-head coaches Ray and Chen left the team, as well as assistant coach Gary, who was on the team in Season 2, if you can recall. None of these departures really are surprising, considering the fact that Chengdu were really only good in one meta. They were very one-dimensional, and that's a problem, you know? If you can't play the meta in a majority of situations, then you gotta be cut. To make up for this lack of coaching, the Hunters welcomed back RUI, who used to be the coach in Season 2, but then he took a step away from the game because of health-related issues, I believe, but now he's back and he's ready to perform. And I think that's great because RUI is arguably the greatest and most famous coach in Chinese Overwatch history. Now it's Vancouver Titans time, and they decided to release 3 players so far, that being Karkar, Suna, and KSA. Karkar and Suna really weren't cutting it. I mean, Suna was on the bench the whole time because Shockwave and Dalton were way better, and Karkar was arguably the worst main support in the league this year. I hate to say that because I love Karkar, but it's kind of the truth. He did struggle a lot of the time. KSA is a bit more shocking though, just because he really wasn't that bad. He was arguably their best player besides Shockwave, but KSA did make it clear as to why the Titans kind of wanted to get rid of him, and it makes sense. He explained that it was hard to practice with the team normally because of internet issues, and obviously you don't want that on your team. If your starting off-tank can't even participate normally because he's lagging all over the place or he's disconnecting from the game, that's a problem. You do not want that. I kind of feel bad for KSA though, because it's not his fault in the slightest. It's not his fault that he can't be with the team. Traveling right now in the modern day is just such a pain considering the circumstances. I could of course be wrong about this, but in all likelihood, I feel like all 3 of these released players are going to have to reprove themselves in the Tier 2 scene if they want to make it back into the Overwatch League. One other Vancouver departure is their assistant coach, Wheats. I believe it was back on September 25th when he left the team. It's kind of old news at this point, but because it technically was during Vancouver's offseason, I wanted to bring it up anyway because this means the Titans' coaching total is now down to 2, I believe. So now that the Titans have kind of settled in with their new team in the league, they'll likely be looking to expand their coaching staff a bit. I mean, I guess it depends on who you're talking to, but if you want some positive news if you're a Vancouver Titans fan, Dalton, Rolf, and Shredlock have all been re-signed through the 2021 season. Dalton re-signing is something I am very pleased about because in my opinion, he definitely deserves to be in the Overwatch League, and this year was just really tough on him and the rest of the Vancouver Titans, so he didn't really get to prove it that much, you know? It was exhausting, it was very hard, and he was being forced onto things that he's not particularly used to playing, like Genji for example, so it was a difficult year for him. But I think in a new situation, with a new team around him and a new year, he might be able to do some good for this team because he did have his bright spots despite all of the struggles last year. Rolf and Shredlock joining back are a bit more interesting, and I think some people are going to be really mad about it, especially with Rolf because he didn't play all that great this year. But you have to remember, for one, he's the team leader, but two, he's also Canadian, so I think that gives Vancouver a bigger incentive to keep him just so they have Canadian representation. Shredlock, though, I don't know what the deal is. Maybe they think that he could work. We'll just have to see, I guess. Now let's talk about the LA teams, and let's start with the Gladiators because they have been very busy so far. To start, both of their main tanks are gone. LH Cloudy and OG are not coming back for Season 4, and LH Cloudy in particular, not too shocking considering that he was basically a Reinhardt specialist and he didn't play all that much to begin with this year, so he's kind of wasting a roster spot. OG, on the other hand, I think maybe could have worked, but there's a lot of better options out there. He's a very inconsistent player. He's only been getting worse as the years have gone on. His Orisa could use a lot of work. His Rein isn't that great. Only his Winston has a redeeming quality to it, I would say. So why not get someone who, for one, is more well-rounded than OG, but two, is also just a lot better. Just go for it. The Gladiators love to spend big during the offseason, so I'm expecting them to get a big-time playmaker at the main tank position to replace these two players. Some of the other Gladiators departures include their strategic coach Curryshot and their assistant coach Faustus, I believe his name is. I'm sorry if I mispronounced that, but those two are both gone, meaning that the Gladiators and DP are looking to rebuild that coaching staff and make it a lot better. And I guess we could talk about this too, even though we already discussed it in a previous video, but Big Goose, Shaz, Bishu, and Jar are all gone, and Bishu and Big Goose have retired from Pro Overwatch. I kind of talked about how I felt about all of these moves in a previous video, so if you want to check those out and hear my opinions on it after this video, make sure to go check out that Gladiators video. Now let's switch over to the Valiant, who released 3 players, being McGravy, Gig, and Apply. What's sad about these departures is all 3 of these guys are so awesome. Like, they're just great people in general, they have fantastic personalities, and they really gave this team life, but unfortunately both Gig and Apply really didn't play all that much this year, so there was no use for them. As for McGravy, he was the starter full-time this year, but he was not all that great. As McGravy put it in his most recent stream where he was answering questions after being released, he said that he was more of a facilitator, but what the Valiant were looking for was a playmaker at the off-tank position, and for the most part, he couldn't really provide that. He's always seen himself as more of a role player type of guy. He likes to try and help the rest of the team. He's not about making the massive plays all the time, but that's what the Valiant needed because, as he was saying, a lot of the time the team kind of felt lost when KSP wasn't carrying them. If he wasn't carrying the team, they were all like, what do we do now? And obviously, that's not okay. So clearly, the Valiant's mindset is to get more playmakers so they don't have to worry about this in future seasons where they're only depending on 1 or 2 guys. Strictly thinking about it personnel-wise, the Valiant really aren't losing anything of value. For one, they have a chance to upgrade their tank line, but two, they also have an opportunity to just make their entire roster better in general. They'll have more pieces that could help them become a better team heading into Season 4. That's all I got for both LA teams, so moving on to the Boston Uprising, they released Halo and Mikey from their player roster, and I think Halo, while he wasn't that bad, also wasn't that great either. He's like a pretty average to maybe slightly above average player depending on who you're talking to, but that's not going to cut it because the Uprising are tired of being losers. This vision of winning and finding success again does not include Halo, sadly. I wish him nothing but the best, but I have no idea what his future holds. As for Mikey, he, I think, has a chance of making it back to the league, because if you did not know, he's been killing it in contenders as of late, and he has a real chance to find a new home at some point during next season, whether it be during this offseason or as a mid-season pickup. If he keeps up this hot streak and he continues to be the most dominant main tank in North American contenders, then I don't see why someone wouldn't want to give him a shot. I'm curious as to why Boston wouldn't want him over Fusions or Axiom, but for all I know, those two could be on their way out as well. Boston might be starting fresh at that position. I know it's not super amazing news and not a lot of people care about it, but just to go over it anyway, even though it happened a while ago, assistant coach Minnie and analyst Spackle also are no longer on the team moving forward, but to compensate for this staff change, they hired Lori of WGS Phoenix as their new head coach, and if you missed out on my Gladiators news video, I know I've mentioned this a million times already, but a lot of people really seem to like this guy. I don't know that much about him personally, but a lot of people are confident he could turn the Boston Uprising around. Because he is the new head coach, that means Mineral has moved down and is now going to be in a management position instead. So if you're a Boston fan and you wanted this guy out of your life for good, sorry, he's still going to be around, but not as a coach anymore, at least. For my Atlanta Reign fans out there, I got a little bit of news for you guys. For one, Fire's contract did not get renewed. I'm sure none of you are shocked down in the comment section about this because he really didn't play all that much. He was basically only there for break duty a couple of games when Massa was not getting the job done. So him leaving is kind of something we all foresaw. If you want some other Atlanta news, we have some potential people who could be leaving. Nothing is confirmed just yet, but Dogman, Pokeball, and FRD are all looking for a new team. Unless I see something from the Atlanta Reign saying that this breakup is official, I'm going to assume there is a chance all three of these guys could resign. It's not likely, but it's still a possibility technically. So Atlanta fans, how are you feeling about these three potentially leaving your team? If you want my honest opinion on this matter, it's really not a big loss in the slightest. I think Dogman, it's kind of sad to see him go potentially just because he was the biggest personality on this team besides Fran in franchise history. He's a great guy to be around. He's a leadership figure, but he is expendable at the end of the day because he has not shown all that much improvement since his rookie season last year. And all the building blocks are in place right now for Dogman to be replaced by Iris, who was a midseason pickup for Atlanta. I know those guys are very excited about him, and for good reason because he has a high ceiling. Pokeball's a bit more interesting because I think he's probably the only guy they really could have considered keeping. I think he has the potential to still be a really solid main tank player in the Overwatch League, but Gator was their guy this year for the most part. Besides Winston metas, Gator has been the starter. But part of me also thinks Atlanta's just done with this guy for whatever reason. Maybe some internal issues happened. I mean, if you want some evidence that something may have gone on between Pokeball and the rest of the team, after Pokeball made his LFT post, Edison retweeted it with a laughing face emoji. I could of course be reading into this too much because there's not a lot of context, but maybe that's a sign that he is happy that guy is gone. And I mean, if that's the case, then sure, get him out of there. I completely understand it. You don't need anything toxic within your environment. And of course, there's also FRD. I really don't have to explain myself much here, but he was on the bench pretty much the entire year except for like 1 or 2 games. He wasn't of much use to this team at all, and Hawk just completely yoinked the starting job away from him, and that's saying a lot because Hawk wasn't even that great this year, so that proves that FRD probably isn't good enough. And if Atlanta want this to be their tank line moving forward still, then why keep FRD? He's just taking up money on the bench. You can get rid of him, get rid of that contract, and you can pursue somebody else who is of more use to you. Atlanta have proven that they're big spenders after last year, so I'm expecting them to go big during the offseason, kind of like the Gladiators. Alright, home stretch, ladies and gentlemen. I have like 6 more teams to get through plus 1 bonus thing. So let's start with the San Francisco Shock. So I got 2 things for you with them. 1, there is a chance that Moth could be leaving the team this year. I'm not saying that he is, but he did say that technically his contract has expired. So during the offseason, he's going to look at every single option. He's going to ask every single team about their plans for next year who was interested in signing him. Moth is the man with a plan. He knows what he wants to do. He's going to explore all of free agency to its maximum, and he's going to test the waters. He's going to see what his worth is. And I think that's a very fair thing to do considering he has been one of the best main supports in the league for 2 straight years now. And I mean, if the Shock can't provide that type of money for Moth, then he might be on his way out because you have to think about it. It's not easy to have a super team be around for multiple years. That's the drawback. When you have that many superstars on a team, you have to pay all of them, and that's not an easy thing to do. It's not easy to keep your entire core. We've seen dynasties in the past just fall apart eventually because they can't pay everyone. There's too many good people. Given Moth's relationship with the Shock and a lot of his teammates, I think there's a good chance he comes back. I would say there's a 60% chance he re-signs, but I'd say there's a 40% chance he wants to test the waters and go somewhere else because you never know who he might want to play with and you never know what kind of contract he might receive. The potential Moth sweepstakes are going to be one of the biggest parts of free agency this year. It's super exciting and I cannot wait to see how it plays out. To add on to the bad news, if you're a San Francisco Shock fan, 2 of their coaches are on their way out. For one, we already talked about Junkbuck earlier. He's going to the Houston Outlaws along with Harsha, but Arachne also is on his way out. I don't know where he's going or if he's going anywhere to begin with, but he is a free agent and he's no longer on the Shock. I'm going to assume that he did find a new gig, but it just hasn't been announced yet for whatever reason, because why wouldn't someone want a coach from the Shock, you know? This is just common sports logic. You want the coaches and staff from the best teams. You want to try and steal them away, and the assistant coaches are going to look for those types of opportunities. They're not going to want to stay assistants. If they can be a head coach somewhere, they're going to take that gig. So long as Krusty is sticking sticking around though. I don't think Shock fans have anything to worry about because he's the real brains behind the operation. He's going to find other people who fit his system just fine. I'm sure he's going to rebuild that coaching staff and everything's going to be wonderful in the lane of the Shock still. The last bit of player news I have for you in regards to a specific team is the Philadelphia Fusion. Nothing is official on their end yet, but EQO did say that he is looking for a team, but he also said he's still negotiating with the Fusion, so you never know what could happen. I'm not going to assume EQO is off the Fusion until the very last second of the season, or unless he signs somewhere else because of last year when the Fusion completely debated us. They said EQO was gone, they even made a goodbye post, then later when they made their roster reveal, they're like, hey, guess what? EQO is back. Haha, funny, we debated you guys. Although this year it does feel a lot more likely that EQO would not return just because of the fact that Ivy was a much better flex DPS for the Fusion this year. He was really solid and he can basically play everything that EQO can. The only time EQO really got significant playtime was during the early stages of the Echo meta and for a little bit during the Genji meta during the Summer Showdown, but that was pretty much it. That was the only time he was ever useful. Personnel-wise, the Fusion aren't losing much of anything if they decide to let EQO walk, but I do think it will be rather sad for the fans, especially if you're an OG Fusion fan, just because he's been there since Season 1 for them. There's a lot of big-time memories involving him, so it's going to be sad for the fans, but I think they'll get over it if they're able to replace him with someone better who can help this team win a championship potentially next year. These last few things don't have to do with players, but they still are team-related, so let's go in quick succession. So for one, the Toronto Defiant parted ways with their interim head coach Lilbo. I think that's a little sad because he was kind of put in an unfair situation to begin with, and I'm pretty sure he didn't even expect this to happen. He was not ready to suddenly just be gone. It sucks, it's really unfair, but hey, that's the business for you. Life isn't always fair. Moving on to the Seoul Dynasty, they parted ways with their general manager after 3 seasons. They are not renewing his contract for a 4th, and I kind of understand that because Seoul kind of wanted to bring home a championship for Korea. They were expected to, and they failed all 3 years in a row, so they want to go in a different direction and see if a new GM can help figure that formula out. Then, of course, both the Justice and the NYXL parted ways with their strategic coaches, and I think this makes a ton of sense if you consider the fact that both of these teams were disappointments in some sort of way. The Justice, even though they had a strong finish this year, they were really bad for a majority of the season. Then with the NYXL, they just weren't as good as they usually were, and I think part of that probably has to do with both of these teams' strategies, you know? Maybe they want to change it up, and they think that will end up helping. I think it makes a ton of sense to do this. Now, for the final bit of news I have for you in this video, it doesn't really have to do with a specific team, but it does have to do with a very memorable name. Ryu Jae-hong has announced that he is done taking a break. He enjoyed his time off, but he is now ready to return to Pro Overwatch, and he is looking for a team heading into Season 4. It's good to have this guy back. He left on such a terrible note because of all the drama that happened with the Vancouver Titans, and he barely got to play because he was splitting playtime with Twilight of all people, who is one of the best flex support players in the world. Now he has a fair chance to be a quality starter again for an Overwatch League team, and I think someone's going to end up picking him up in the end because there are some teams who could use an upgrade at this position. Thinking about it logically, Jae-hong has only ever played on Korean-speaking teams, so I doubt he'll want to go to an English-speaking team, so for that matter, I think of teams like the Spark, or maybe the Washington Justice as potential bidders. And I know it sounds kind of cursed, but if the Dallas Fuel were to go full Korean, then maybe they could get Jae-hong to join. Jae-hong brings a lot to the table. He's pretty valuable. He's a veteran, he's a good leader, he's a great guy and teammate, and he has a good hero pool as well. His Ana, as we all know, is god tier, his Zenyatta's always been pretty decent, and although the sample size was pretty small, his Baptiste didn't look all that bad either. I would be shocked if nobody signs him, and I'd be mad too because we need a Ryu Jae-hong redemption arc. This could be the last time we ever see him play Pro Overwatch because he's getting old, and I know that he has considered retirement in the past, so this could be one of the last years we ever see him play on stage. We need to make it happen. But that's pretty much all I have to say about Jae-hong being a free agent, so that's going to do it. That wraps up episode 1 of this very, very long Overwatch League 2021 off-season recap. I hope you guys enjoyed it. A lot more is going to be on the way pretty much every single week unless the news is really dry. So if you want to keep up to date with all of it, make sure to hit that like button if you enjoyed this content and subscribe to the channel if you're new. And let me know what you think of all of this down in the comment section. And as always, thanks so much for watching this content. I really do appreciate your support. And until next time, this is ATP, signing out. Peace.